Hey friends, welcome back for another episode of the latest word on Black news. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. Well, building generational wealth is a blueprint of the American dream for many families, but racial disparities in real estate have presented challenges for Black America. Did you know the contract price for homes appraised in Black neighborhoods are 1.9 times more likely to be underappraised than in a predominantly white neighborhood? Now, that's according to Brook's research. The Biden administration is now taking steps to level the appraisal process. Our guest, Lydia Pope, brings us the latest word on home appraisal bias and solutions to help reverse the cycle. Well, joining me now is Lydia Pope, president of the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Lydia, thank you so much for joining us to talk about, like I said, this very important story and the fact that this is kind of taken away from us building generational wealth in a way. So we want to talk about how property appraisals are so important, and having people that look like you and I in that space is very important. So first of all, tell me a little bit about like what your initiative is in terms of getting more Black property appraisers in the industry.
Absolutely. First of all, hello, everyone, the viewers. I'm Lydia Pope, the 32nd president of NAREB. We've been around for over 75 years. And one of our affiliate is called the NASRA, National Society of Real Estate Appraisers, is an affiliate of NAREB. And what we're doing, because we're understanding a lot of the deficiencies and what's happening in the community when it comes to appraising. So our organization had taken a stand with our national appraisers that during our conferences, there's two ways we do it. During our conferences, we're going to be educating those that are interested in becoming a licensed appraiser. Maybe someone's taking a different stand on a career move. Maybe it's someone that just had an appraiser license in the past, let it go, and want to basically kind of rehash that whole process. We're going to be doing that at our national. But secondly, one of our 5 pillars is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in that pillar, what we're doing is that we're educating our HBCU students in the field of appraising. That's one of our opportunities that as a HBCU student that once you graduate, you may want to look at appraising as part of your real estate career. So we're doing it 2 different ways.
I love that because it's such a big deal right now, especially when you're looking at like the article that I sent you that most recently where President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris said, look, we got to make it more an equal playing field for these people who are trying to be able to sell their homes or when they're going to buy a home and things like that. So you have to have people in place who wants to ensure a fair process. So, Lydia, talk a little bit about like our homes located in Black communities being actually evaluated by appraisers who live in communities that they serve.
Yeah, so when it comes to appraising and it comes to being in the heart of the city, the communities, first of all, who knows the community better than we do? We live it, we breathe it. Our children go to school there, we go to school there. So we know the value in the areas of the community. But what's happening is when properties are being appraised, and it's appraised of someone who may not understand that one house across the street from the other may be at the same value. What they're doing is they're undervaluing the properties. They're not even going, some appraisers are not even going into the property to value some of the upgrades that the community has done. So it's so important that we begin to make that change with the appraisers and really bringing in more Black appraisers in the community.
Yeah. And I mean, when you look at some of the numbers, just going through some of the reports that I've read through, they talk about like there was one woman who decided to change her race on her application when it was time to get her property appraised because she just wanted to see if there was going to be a difference. And there was about a difference of $125,000. What does that say about the fact that you have to have people in place to make sure things like that don't happen?
So, you got to go back. When you go back to history and talk about like the systematic racism, when you only have 1% that are Black appraisers and 99% that are other, what typically happens is appraisers, when they go through the appraisal process, they have to be invited in by someone. It's called the apprenticeship to be able to learn how to do appraising. So you got to remember, if you have only 1% that are African American or Blacks that are doing appraising and they're bringing in other appraisers, the other 99% are not. And then you blend that in with some of the systematic racism that happens when the appraiser is going out to the property, the values are being lowered. So, you can't, it all goes back again to bringing those appraisers in that looks like us, that can be able to go into the community to be able to do correct and accurate valuations on these properties.
Do you think what the president and the vice president are doing with this particular initiative is going to actually, will we see some real change from that?
Well, I would say yes. Okay. It's been a quiet storm, over these last decades and even centuries when it comes to appraising. When you have a 1% over the centuries of this of the appraising process, we have a problem. And so when the Biden-Harris administration had, of course, our Secretary of HUD initiate the PAVE, and they're looking at making changes, it heightens the awareness. It lets folks know around the country that, we don't have Blacks in appraising. So you have to talk about it and begin to open up those doors and allow folks to be able to get into this field and know you can. But we're going to need more help and assistance because we're still talking about that 1% Black. So those other 99% have to be open to bringing in African-American appraisers within their organizations, within their companies, to be able to make change.
Yeah, that's a very good point there. And Lydia, what is the process like? For the ones who don't know, maybe they're thinking this is hard for them to get into. What does that process look like?
Well, the appraising process isn't hard. It's just like a real estate exam. And like most of these studies that folks that goes into the real estate field, the lending field, the title field, it's taking the required workshop classes that would allow you to be able to get the courses needed to be able to take the test. And then you will have to sit under someone called an apprenticeship. And they are changing those rules and laws, as we speak. Hopefully we'll have changes very soon so that that process will be, if not eliminated, lessened. So it's the apprenticeship that's where it stops. But the apprenticeship is that you have to have so many hours of apprenticeship underneath a licensed appraiser in order to be able to sit in to take that exam. So your workshop classes you've taken along with the apprenticeship allows you to take that exam, which then, qualifies you to go into the appraising industry.
Now, how are homeowners appraisers selected? How does that work?
So typically the homeowners appraisers, years ago, we used to be able to, choose appraisers, but now the bank chooses the appraisers now. So the way they've gotten it, the bank chooses the appraisal company to do the appraisals. And I'm not sure of how the calculation are marketed, but the banks are choosing those appraisers. So when they go out to appraise the property to the homeowner, then the homeowner, takes a look at it and the homeowner lets them into the property, make sure that the house is appraised. It used to be a point where real estate agents and licensees were able to, I don't want to use the word interfere, but able to at least provide some assistance to the appraisers, especially if they're not familiar with the area, because they may be knocking down a couple of appraisal prices, number one, because they're in a Black neighborhood. And then sometimes, as I stated on the CNN, you have to unblack your house in order to be able to get a higher appraisal on there because of the biases and the discriminative practices of some of the appraisers itself, not so much the company, but the people themselves.
And so for someone who's never heard that term, unblack your house, what does that mean? And how dare we have to even go through that process?
Yeah, to unblack your home, meaning that taking down anything that makes up your culture, your heritage, who you are, from photos and pictures to decor and decorations, so that the property doesn't look like it's a Black-owned home. And that's very difficult. And I just think it's so important that we begin to change that whole dynamic of the value. They're looking at personal things worth versus the value of the property. So when you have a discriminative appraiser that walks into a property and lessens the value because they saw someone's culture that are in the property, it makes it really hard. And then we have to go through the dispute process, which sometimes the dispute process is not easy as well.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Also too, are the same types of issues, do they arise when it comes to gentrification as well? When they go to gentrify a neighborhood, do they still have these same issues when it comes to talking about the value of the neighborhood?
So, wow, you picked a great topic when it comes to gentrification. So, gentrification, for those who don't know, is properties, is folks that are in a property in a neighborhood that was considered a low to moderate neighborhood. And then you have developers that are coming in to rebuild properties. So what it does, it takes that person out of that area, it removes them, and then the prices are escalated much higher than if they were to stand at the property and re-updating their properties or rehabbing or refurbishing it. And to the question that you're stating, and the answer to that is yes. The developers and what they're doing, they're upping the sales price. Yes, they're adding on different incentives, but those incentives are increasing the sales value of that particular property. But yet, and still, a person who lives in that same property, they won't get the same value as that new development is across the street. You can be next door to it, and the value would not be the same. So we have to make changes. And then they talk about the calculations that we put the numbers in the system, but the numbers are biased. The system is biased itself. So we have a lot of work to do. And I know that the Secretary of HUD and her entire team are working really hard to identify some of these appraisal biases in their pay report.
Yeah, it is. We could talk about this all day.
Yes,
because there's so much.
It is for what it is. Yeah.
And so, Lydia, talk about the fact that obviously, home ownership is key to building generational wealth and leaving something behind, a legacy for our families. How does this appraisal issue impact generational wealth?
Oh, it impacts it tremendously. A devaluation of a property because of discriminative practices, it takes away that child going to college, having to not have to have a student loan. And that's a high value as it is. It takes away the person trying to maybe pay their debts off and to refinance so they can pay their bills off and maybe have some peace of mind because the property should have been valued much higher. It takes away the generational wealth of that person sending someone, maybe paying for a child's schooling, paying for someone's vehicle, a child of any of that. It's just so much that it can happen by the devaluation of the appraisal prices. 5, 10, 15, 20, even more plus $1,000 can be put into an investment, into something in the IRA. But guess what? That property value was taken down, so it's been limited. And it puts Blacks right back in the same place of systematic racism that we're dealing with now. The lesser the money, the lesser that they can get out of the community to do different things that will benefit their families. But they can't because the values are just too low.
Yeah. You're speaking to a lot of things that shows and highlights the fact that there has to be a change at some point in order to get us to a level playing field. And so for those, like you and I, like if some folks don't know this, can you talk about how lucrative working in that industry is so that maybe it attracts more Black people to want to work in the appraisal industry?
So, so I think that, again, in order to make a change, we got to make a difference. And in order to make a difference, that you have to come into the field. When I look at appraisers, 1% Blacks, even real estate agents are 5% Blacks. We have to really jump ourselves in. And I think loan officers are 9% Black. So all that to say that it's going to be important that we make a change in our communities, even within our young folks and those that are looking to do a change in field. So I always encourage to get an appraiser's license because you can make a difference in someone's life. That one person, if you change their life, can send that child to school to graduate without having to have high debt or student loans because their parents couldn't afford, because that money used to refinance could have been used to pay the best thing of them, which is their education. And even more than that, their debts.
Wow. Is there anything else that you wanted to add just about like what you guys are going to do to continue this mission and kind of trying to get us more involved in this process?
Yes, with our National Association of Real Estate Brokers, we're going to continue this legacy of educating our members to increase and make changes in their career paths, but also to our students, our young folks. We have a huge millennial following, a lot of HBCU students all around the country. And even if you're not in the HBCU, that you're a Black student, maybe just joining that career or just looking into that career could be something that can really grow. Average appraiser can go anywhere from, I would say, 60,000 plus, depending on the company you're working with. But it's a good career change, and it's a good career for our young folks to jump into so that, number one, you can work on your scheduling. The scheduling is flexible. But it's just a great way to jump into real estate, because real estate and land is the best thing in the country, because land will always be there. So the jobs will always be there.
Oh, that look, this in my podcast episode, we're doing a 3-part series about layoffs and how they've impacted our community tremendously. And so just knowing that there are so many jobs where it's like falling by the wayside, that there are other opportunities that people can still build and learn something new. Now, do you have to have an actual real estate license to get to this? Or like you explained a little bit earlier about the process, but is it still the same amount of work to get to the appraisal process, or how does that work?
No, you don't have to have a real estate license, but it's good to have one. Because a lot of times when the appraisers go to pull up their comparables, they're looking on the real estate systems to pull comparables. And so you don't have to be licensed to do it. But what the license does is, we have a lot of folks that are in real estate that put their license in escrow and hold on to it for a rainy day and then do their appraising. But what it does, it just opens opportunities up, because as a licensed appraiser and you're out there in the field, hey, you may find a property that you may want to purchase and become an investor or a homeowner. It's about building that legacy wealth and having different forms of income that can really help to penetrate the neighborhood to get the things that you need done, especially as a homeowner. And it's just extra knowledge and education. I think is wonderful to have it, but it's not necessary, but I just think it's recommended highly to have that license.
Now, is there a list of these property appraisers anywhere? Is it like the bank has a list and you could request and say, hey, I want to see who's the Black people who are on this list? Is that possible?
Well, I know through HUD and PAVE, they're working on that process, but internally, typically, they don't release those lists of their appraisers that are part of, within the industry. My understanding is just a cycle that goes through. It's like a pick of names. You're the next person, so that person gets the actual appraisal report. But I'm not sure how the system calculates itself. But I think that is important that PAVE and Secretary of HUD, they're looking at how those systems are working. They're looking at how the appraisers are going out, how many are Black. And again, with the 1%, you're not going to have a large amount of appraisers around the country that being able to assist until we grow that number. So you're going to see definitely more Caucasians, more others, but definitely not a lot of African Americans in the appraising.
My last question too, you mentioned this earlier about the formula, the system that's used is kind of set up to be biased on its own. What goes into that system for it to basically like clunk out to be like, okay, a Black person is applying to sell their home? What is happening in that system when it's doing the calculations to be able to showcase that bias?
So bias is only the people who put it into the system. So if you're inputting information that is biased, then the report's going to come out biased. So it's what's put into the actual electronic system that gives a bias. Of course, it's going to give a biased report now. Because if you say the value is only, and you don't go through the entire process of comparables, and there are some additional comparables you could have done your homework on, maybe you didn't go on the property, you added in a value that was less than what it should have been, guess what you've done? The system now creates this whole bias report that is less than what the value is. And the first thing that a person says is, oh, it's in black and white. Well, who put the information in the system to create the black and white report? Is human hands. And it goes back to the systematic racism of the human hands that are putting that information in the system.
Now, Lydia, lastly, what do you want to see come out of all of this?
Man, I would love to see an increase in Black appraisers, whether they're young or field change, because we have to grow that number. We can never move forward until that number is grown. There's no workshops or classes around the country that's going to help grow that number. We have to grow that number. So it's so important that you look into getting an appraiser's license so that you can be at least be committed to this and changing the faces of that 1% and bringing it to, a 5 or 10%. I would love to see the needle move, but so far we haven't.
Yeah, that is definitely the prayer and the hope at this point, because obviously, these numbers are alarming, and just looking at how people have faced this. And of course, a lot of this came from just talking about what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and wiping out the Greenwood neighborhood, and how that was never able to rebuild in a way that it should have after all of that happened. So, yeah, I mean, that's the prayer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're just hoping for that change. And we'll be keeping our eyes out on that as well.
All right. Well, Lydia Pope, thank you so much for weighing in on this for me. Like I said, very important issue. And I know that so many people need this information. And perfectly, it brings more Black people into the appraisal industry.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me.
Of course.
Many thanks to NAREB's Lydia Pope for joining us. She definitely dropped some gems, and I hope she's inspired you like she inspired me to go into the appraisal industry, because who knew all of this information about this? So I'm so excited that she was able to bring us all of that information. And thank you all so much for joining us on the latest word on Black news. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. Until next time, take care.